All right, so today we're going to draw a cup. You have the styrofoam cup in your bag, and I'm going to put it on a white piece of paper. That way I can easily see the shadows and judge my values. I'm also going to take a little piece of tape and tape it down so it's not going to move out of the way. I'm also going to start with 2 different pencils. So you were given a 4B pencil, and you want to start with a regular number 2 or HB pencil. This is a fun one made by Musgrave in Tennessee. That's a bicolored bugle. And you're going to do this in your sketchbook. My sketchbook is about 9 by 12, so I'm going to divide the page in half and do about 6 by 9 drawing. So I'm going to make 2 marks and then connect those to divide the page in half. And so I'm going to be drawing up here. I'm not worried about my composition at this stage. This drawing is just going to be focusing on value, proportion, shading, form. So I do want to keep it at least life size. You can make it a little bit bigger. And I want to fill this rectangle. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sight. So I'm going to imagine that I have a line that is piercing the center of the cup. So if it were to go through here and come out the center of the bottom, what is that angle? Not the angle here, but what's the angle of the center? And I'm going to transfer that to my page. Sometimes this is easier to do with a second pencil. So I'm going to imagine that pencil is going through there, and then I can even just come lay that down and lightly. So I'm starting with that HB pencil. You can also just get in the habit of sighting, then bringing it back, and then kind of bringing that line. And I want to keep all of these initial lines very light, so that way if I make a mistake and they're in the wrong place, I can always erase them. I also have with me my eraser. So once I've got that, I'm going to decide where this line is going to be, and I'm going to decide where this is going to be. All right, so I'm deciding on that length. And it doesn't really matter as long as everything else is in proportion to that. So the next stage of sighting is going to be how I determine some measurements. So the width of this in relationship to the length. So in order to do that, I have my arm outstretched, and I'm going to put the tip of my pencil right here and my thumb right there, and then decide, okay, how wide is that? 1, 2, and like a little bit. It's about double. This entire time, my arm is outstretched and straight, because if my elbow is bent, then I could be changing the distance between the pencil and my eye, and so then my measurements aren't going to be consistent. So with my arm locked, I'm going to measure this. So that is my kind of standard, and then that's 1 and about 2. So it's about twice. So I could do a couple things. I could just divide this length in half and make sure it is, and then say, okay, that's how wide that is. Or I could say, all right, I want this width, say I want it to be that wide, so I can take this and go 1 and 2. So then that's going to be the width of my cup. And I think I'm going to do that. So again, this 1, 2. Just going to check it one more time. 1, 2. And there's like a teeny little bit more. So it's like that. All right, so again, here's that angle. Here is this width. Now, it's not that this equals this. I could make this bigger and make my cup larger. So I'm not directly laying this measurement on my page. I'm just using sighting as a guide. Now I need to determine how big is this in comparison to this. So again, with my arm stretched out, right? That is like that. And this is about 1 and maybe about 1.5. I can also take this measurement and check this. So that's about maybe 3/4, maybe a little bit more. So if I have 1.5, so 1.5, so it's something like there, 1.5, all right. And then just another way of checking is sighting this angle. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to bring this down there, sighting that, bringing that down. And that's pretty good. That one to this one. Okay, so it looks like this needs to come down. I'm also doing this overhead versus sitting, so that's something that I wanna watch. I also, depending on how you are sitting, you may want to angle your paper towards you, because if you draw with it flat and you're sitting a little bit far away, things might get skewed a bit. It's also really important to have your subject right in front so you can be drawing and then look up to see exactly what you're drawing the whole time. All right, so yeah, it looks like this is that angle. Maybe a little. And this is why we keep things nice and light, because it's a lot of tweaking, and if I look at it from one angle versus if I'm moving my head a different angle. So I like to check again and again a few times. And then also keeping in mind that, yeah, so I'm actually gonna, and so what happened is, I think this center line I had off a bit. So it's more like that. So that didn't really change these measurements. So that gets shifted. All right. So again, I'm going to take this 1, 2, and a little bit. So okay. So that's 1, 2, and a little, and then 1.5. I think that needs to come down. Okay. And so now I want to look at the distance between this lip and that lip, because what I have is a circle. If I look at it from this way, it's a circle. If I look at it from this way, it's a circle. But as I tilt it, that circle is getting squished more and more, and what becomes an ellipse. It's always round, but it's just getting squished. This width always stays the same. This width is what is changing. It's like this. So as I'm looking at this, I have to, and from overhead you can't really see it, but from the angle that I'm at, this, so I'm going to measure in relationship. So I'm measuring that distance, and it is about, I'd say about 1/3 of the width. So my 1/3 is there, so that ellipse is about here. And again, this width is what's changing, this width is not. So this is always round here. This is always round. and then that distance will be the same over here. So this and this. And now, even though I can't see through the cup, if I were to look this way, this is what I'm drawing, but as if I could see through the cup. So again, it'll be that width here. And it's a gradual tapering, and this part can be a little bit tricky. Oops, it goes there. You know, that it's directly from above. Again, it's a circle, and then it will slowly get squished. You don't, it's not something like this. It doesn't come to a point. It's also not like this. Okay, so it's not those two things. That it's a slow tapering. Now, I also have these other ellipses. So this one, and the other lip. So I have to think about, and now that I've drawn this, I can so I have, and I'm gonna clean up my lines in a second. So I've got the big one, which is like the lip of the cup, this one here. And this is straight, so it hasn't tapered at all. And again, it wraps. So if we were to have this, this is again the same distance. If you were to think about like bracelets around your wrist. All right. And then I have this little lip there. And then this little lip there. And it's those little details that are going to make it look realistic. All right. And then I want to check my measurements because, you know, in adjusting that, I'm looking like this is getting a little small too quickly. So again, I'm going to check my width in comparison to my length. So that's about that, and yeah, so I think this needs to be third. Yeah, so it's about 1 1/3 of this. So 1 and about 1/3. It's like there. So I'm going to bring that down. And then I'm going to check again that width in comparison. Yeah, and it's a little more than double. Yeah, so I think I need to make this a little bigger. Not by much, but just a little. You know, and this is again why I want to keep my pencil lines nice and light. And then down here, I have a couple different ellipses that I am drawing. I have this edge, I have the lip here, I have the lip underneath it. Again, you can't really see from overhead. And all of those follow each other. So this and this and this and this and this are all kind of concentric or parallel rings to each other. And this is the most important step. It's like building a house. You wouldn't start painting the house or adding pictures on the wall or even drywall before you have the foundation and the framing in. It doesn't matter how well I shade this pencil if it's not the right size and shape, it's going to look off. So that should be a little more straight there. Okay. Right, so that's the structure of my pencil. Okay, so now for shading, we want to think about the different kinds of light that we're seeing. So you want to be lighting your cup primarily from one direction. That way you're getting a very clear highlight, so that's the brightest part you can see. You're getting this crest shadow, so that's where it slowly gets darker. Here it's getting darker because my light source is coming from here. You're getting that cast shadow, so that's the shadow cast onto the paper. And then you're also getting reflected light, and you can see this little band of white right here, and that's the light bouncing off of this onto that. And you can even see the shadow of my fingers on that because it's reflecting. So I'm going to start by creating a little value scale over here. All right, so I have white. This is going to be my darkest, and this is going to be like my middle value here. So I'm going to start with that HB pencil. And notice my hand is very far back. I am letting almost like the weight of the pencil and sometimes it can be a little tough to do it right at the edge of the page, so all right. And then I'm going to go back in and add a second layer starting at number 3. And you want these boxes to be each separate distinct values. It shouldn't just look like one smudge from white to black. That way you're thinking about those distinct values. And then instead of smudging to mix them, because we really don't want to be smudging graphite pencil, the oils in our hands are going to make it look dirty. Charcoal has oil in it, and so that's fine to smudge charcoal. But pencil, we really don't want to be smudging it because we're just going to introduce oils. It can get dirty and kind of blotchy. And don't be afraid of the texture of the pencil, but if you like it nice and smooth, what you can do is change the direction of your marks and overlap. Make sure those marks are close together. You can also use more of the side of the pencil, and making sure too that you're not rushing to that 4B pencil too quickly, and that you're using, you're letting the pencil get as dark as it can before you use the 4B. Or, you're not going to be able to get these really light values with the 4B pencil. And also know that the grades of pencil are not necessarily a universal thing. An American pencil 4B may look different than a Japanese or a German 4B pencil. So I'm trying to get this one as dark as I can, so that I know that that's as dark as I can make a value. Graphite tends to be a little more gray, a little more silvery than charcoal will be. So even at its darkest, it's not going to be as dark as charcoal. All right, and then here, and what I like to do is look at it from above, kind of squint and noticing, like that's a good transition. These two are looking too similar. This is too big of a jump. It's much easier to add another layer than it is to erase or to make something lighter. So I try to go slowly, one layer at a time. A little bit less pressure here because this layer doesn't need as much. It's looking pretty good. These two are looking a little too similar, so I'm going to make this one go a little darker. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. All right. So now what I'm going to start doing is finding these values here. And you could almost do a kind of paint by number. I could start to really lightly, first thing I'm going to do is erase through that part, because that's, again, not actually something that's there. I'm going to look at, this is kind of the edge of the highlight. And I've got a band here. Then I've got a dark band here. I've got my reflected light here. And then I'm also going to kind of draw in the shapes of these shadows that I'm seeing, where the shadow comes out from there. And I have my main light, I have one other desk light, and you can see a little bit of a difference there. I'm going to turn that one off just so we don't get multiple shadows. This little kind of smudginess here. And then also looking at the rim of the cup is going to act a little bit differently. It's catching a little bit of more light here. This line is visible. Underneath the cup is looking a little bit different. All right. So now I'm going to start putting in some of those lighter values that I'm seeing. And I'm, again, my HB pencil. Thinking about the direction of my marks. You can also always draw more and shade more a little bit, and then go back in with an eraser to clean up. And I think a mistake that people make too often is shading one part completely, taking it all the way to the darkest in one spot, and then you've made a mistake where that needs to be recalibrated a little bit or shouldn't be as dark, and then you have to go in and erase. Another strategy that I use is a piece of paper under my hand. That way I'm not smudging values that I've carefully created. So even that reflected light is still like maybe a number 2. It's not a bright white number 1 value. And then I have my shape down here. And I'm going to make these marks go in a different direction because it's the table that it's sitting on. Again, I'm holding that pencil far back. I'm not gripping tightly on it to keep my marks nice and light. All right, and then I can also make some marks travel the length of the cup. Okay, and then I can start now looking what needs to go darker. Really everything but that brightest highlight. I'm also careful of what I'm leaving white. I can go in with an eraser if I need to, but there are areas that I want to make sure that I'm not shading that need to stay white. Little details like underneath the cup, that little circle piece. There's even some like writing under there, which you can choose to ignore if you want, or if you're interested in those little markings. I'm also looking at like the darkest spot is where that cup is touching the table. Another trick you can do is to create a very sharp edge. Is lay your piece of paper down and then just shade right up against it. You can even use that as a tool for erasing as well. That's really nice with charcoal. I can also just bring my marks here. And then I'm finding that I'm starting to reach the limit of my HB pencil. It's not getting as dark as I want it to. So I'm going to switch over to my 4B pencil. And that's when I can start putting in some of those darker values. And the other thing I want to be careful of is that I'm not outlining, that there's not a black line around the cup that's then shaded in. It's just values up against another value. So this edge of the cup is just darker and then gets lighter kind of quickly, actually. And if I'm finding that that edge is looking a little rough, I could lay my paper and just take my eraser. It also helps sometimes to have a sharper eraser. Although I'll clean up a lot of this stuff at the end. And I'm just paying attention to these tiny little transitions, the way that this lip transitions around. So this is that crest shadow. So it's the darkest, just like the highlight is this, peak that's the brightest. The crest shadow is this crest that is the darkest shadow on the object that then fades in both directions towards this reflected light and towards the highlight. And so getting that transition right is really critical to make an object look convincingly round. If you transition it too slowly, it can look flat. If you transition it too quickly, it won't look realistic. Changing the direction of my marks, looking at the way this peak, and then go in with my eraser and erase out. And depending on the kind of paper that you're working on, the shading may feel different. This paper is a little warm, like a little yellowy. It's also very smooth, where if you have some paper with more tooth to it, it's gonna make your marks a little bit different. It also may cause you some problems if you're erasing. It's also another reason to avoid smudging, because the different, if it's very toothy, it can get kind of funky when you smudge it. I'm noticing this little highlight here. And if you take something a little too far, like if I need to go in with my eraser, that your eraser can act as a drawing tool. The texture of the paper will also make the pencil work a little bit differently. That a 4B might look darker on more toothy paper. And then stepping back, stepping away, looking at it from above, making sure that my transitions are nice and smooth. This is where I might go back with my HB pencil, smooth out some of these things. Okay. And then I can go, as my last step is to kind of clean things up. That highlight that shows up. Making sure my edges are sharp. I don't have any stray lines or stray smudges. I also like working on shadows with an eraser is nice, because you can kind of let things fade in. And that's where you can kind of smudge things a little bit. But don't be afraid of marks. It doesn't need to look like a black and white photograph, because it's not. It's a drawing. And so don't be afraid of those pencil marks, pencil lines, eraser marks even. It's a little bit of a